a matron whispered loudly to Lenora's left. "He hasn't left Lady Constance's side all evening." "A perfect match," another sighed, though one wonders what will happen to her poor companion. "Once Constance is a duchess, a penniless shadow like Miss Brookstone will have no place left to hide." Lenora Brookstone kept her hands clasped tightly behind her back, hiding the way her fingers trembled. The pain wasn't sharp, it was a dull weight in her chest, like a stone swallowed whole. "Lenora, darling," Constance whispered, stepping away from the circle of admirers to take Lenora's hands. "Yes, Constance?" Lenora managed a small smile. "You look exhausted, and your hands are like ice," Constance noted, her eyes filled with genuine worry. She leaned in, her golden hair brushing Lenora's cheek. "Go sit in the alcove for a while. I'll need my wrap after the waltz, but I want you to rest your feet until then." "I'm fine, truly," Lenora lied, though her throat tightened at the kindness. "She is my only friend in the world, and I am a traitor for wanting the man holding her hand." "I won't hear of it," Constance insisted, giving her fingers a playful squeeze. "Sit. Hide behind the ferns if you must. I shall find you when the music stops." Lenora nodded, retreating to the edge of the room where the shadows were deepest. She was a girl of noble blood, but no coin, kept only by the grace of the Fairley family, and every kind word from Constance felt like a debt she could never repay. "Miss Brookstone?" The voice stopped her heart. She froze, turning slowly to find Arthur Weatherford, the Duke of Solihull, standing terrifyingly close. "Your Grace," she managed, sinking into a curtsy that felt clumsy. "I did not see you approach." "You were leaving," he said, his grey eyes locked on hers with a startling intensity. "The waltz has only just begun." I have a headache," Lenora whispered, her gaze dropping to his perfectly tied cravat. She couldn't look him in the eye. A duke did not court a penniless companion, and even a shadow of his favor would result in a scandal that would put her on the street. "A headache," Arthur repeated, his voice dropping to an intimate, grave register. He shifted his weight, subtly placing his broad shoulders between her and the prying eyes of the matrons. "Or perhaps the room is simply too loud. You flinched when the trumpet started." Lenora looked up, her breath catching. "You noticed?" "I notice a great many things, Miss Brookstone." For a second, the air between them crackled. Arthur took a step closer, the scent of sandalwood and cold night air clinging to his coat like a physical touch. He looked at her with a desperate kind of frustration, his hand twitching at his side as if he wanted to reach out, but the world wouldn't let him. "There you are, Arthur." Constance appeared at his elbow, breathless and beaming as she tapped his arm with her fan. "And Lenora, you look pale, darling. Is the heat too much?" The connection snapped. Arthur's expression smoothed into a polite, impenetrable mask as he glanced toward the matrons watching them from the shadows. "Miss Brookstone was just retiring," Arthur said calmly. "I believe the noise is distressing her." Lenora felt a sharp sting of rejection, blinded by her own insecurity to the fact that he was rescuing her from the gossips. "Of course," she whispered, forcing a smile that felt like glass cutting her lips. "Enjoy the dance." She turned and fled, her head held high until the carriage door slammed shut, cutting off the sounds of the ball. 2 hours later, Lenora sat in the quiet drawing room of her family's rented townhouse, the fire dying in the grate. "Miss." The butler, Higgins, stood in the doorway holding a small silver tray. "A package arrived for you, miss," Higgins said, his voice a low rasp in the silence. "A footman delivered it just now." Lenora frowned, her fingers hovering over the brown paper. "At this hour? For me?" "Yes, miss." Higgins set the tray on the low table and retreated. Her fingers trembled as she undid the string and lifted the lid to find a pocket-sized edition of sonnets from the Portuguese bound in soft blue leather. She gasped, the leather cool and smooth against her palms. "Who?" she whispered to the empty room. She opened the cover. No inscription. Just a single dried sprig of lavender pressed between the pages, the same flower she had tucked into her hair that night. Her heart raced as she traced the spine, but then the scent hit her. It didn't smell of a bookshop. It smelled of sandalwood and cold night air. Lenora closed the book, pressing it to her chest as a tear slipped down her cheek, hot and fast. To be seen by a stranger felt like an insult when the only eyes she wanted were currently smiling at her best friend. The air inside the conservatory was thick, humid, and heavy with the scent of damp earth. Lenora Brookstone stood by a wall of white jasmine, the heat making the fine hairs at the nape of her neck damp against her skin. Arthur did not fidget. He turned to her, his posture relaxed, but his gaze felt like a physical weight she could feel even when she refused to look up. "You are quiet today, Miss Brookstone," he noted. "I have little to say that would interest a duke." Lenora deflected. She reached out to study a waxy petal, her pulse thumping a frantic rhythm against her collarbone. "Try me," Arthur challenged softly. "I find I'm often bored by the things that interest dukes. I would prefer to know what interests you." Lenora glanced up, and the breath died in her throat. His eyes were dark and focused, stripping away her titles and her silence until she felt entirely exposed. "I was thinking about the orchids," she said, her voice small against the backdrop of the dripping humidity. "They are trapped under glass. They would die if they were exposed to the real world." Arthur didn't blink. He took the metaphor and twisted it with a precision that made her heart ache. "Perhaps," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "Or perhaps they simply need a gardener who understands their nature. A gardener who would build a wall to block the wind, rather than forcing them to weather the storm alone." He stepped closer, the scent of sandalwood washing over her. The world felt dizzy and small, reduced to the space between their heartbeats. "Tell me, Miss Brookstone," he asked, his voice a rough whisper. "If a man wished to build such a wall, if he wished to be a protector rather than a master, would a woman find that suffocating?" Lenora stopped breathing, the question hanging in the air like a confession. "He isn't asking about gardening. He's asking for permission to love me." "I cannot speak for all women, Your Grace," she whispered, fixing her eyes on the silk of his cravat to avoid the world his grey eyes offered. "But if you are asking for Lady Constance, I believe she would find it everything." She used her friend's name like a shield, a reminder of the barrier that stood between a duke and a shadow. Arthur held her gaze, a flash of pain crossing his face before he crushed it behind a mask of noble stoicism. "Everything," he repeated, the words sounding more like a vow than a confirmation. "Thank you, that is good to know." "Arthur," Constance called from the other end of the glass house, "come look at this vine. It's absolutely prehistoric." The spell broke, leaving the air between them cold, despite the heat. Arthur closed his eyes for a brief second of controlled agony. "Duty calls," he said, his voice dry and hollow. He bowed and walked away, his broad shoulders receding toward the golden light that always followed Constance. Lenora reached out to the damp brick wall to keep her knees from buckling. "He's just being thorough," she told herself, the lie tasting like ash. "He's just practicing on the shadow." But her heart beat a different rhythm against her ribs. Liar, liar, liar. The fire in the private library was roaring, but the heat couldn't reach the chill in Arthur Weatherford's blood. He paced the Persian rug, his boots sinking into the heavy wool with every restless step. "It is time," Arthur said, stopping abruptly before the marble fireplace. "The season is half over. I want a proposal. I want the ring on her finger." Constance sat at the mahogany desk, the scent of hot red wax filling the air as she sealed invitations. She didn't look up, though a small smile played on her lips. "You cannot just walk up to her with a diamond, Arthur. She'll faint. She thinks you are mine." "I have a plan," Arthur said, his hand moving to the back of his neck to soothe the tension there. "But I need her ring size. It must be undeniable. If it doesn't fit her perfectly, the moment is ruined." Constance tapped her chin with the quill, her eyes sparking with mischief. "Then we need a moment alone. I will make myself scarce. But Arthur, do not take too long. If my father walks in and sees you holding her hand, the game is up." "I only need a minute," Arthur promised, checking his pocket watch. "A minute to touch her skin before the world pulls us apart again." Later that afternoon, the drawing room felt quiet and grey. Lenora sat on the velvet window seat, her fingers tangled in a mess of embroidery silks. "The Duke of Solihull," the footman announced. Lenora's hands stilled. She didn't look up, forcing herself to take a slow, shallow breath against the sudden hammering of her heart. "Lady Constance," Arthur said as he entered, his energy feeling like a live wire against the silk-covered walls. He bowed low. "I was hoping to steal a moment of your time regarding the charity ball." "The ball!" Constance cried, springing to her feet with practiced innocence. "I completely forgot the guest list is in the study. Lenora, do entertain His Grace. I shall return in 5 minutes." The door clicked shut with a finality that made the silence thick enough to suffocate. Lenora stood, her knees feeling like water as she dipped a curtsy. "Your Grace." Arthur didn't sit. He glanced at the door before stepping into her personal space, the scent of rain and sandalwood reaching her a second before he spoke. "Miss Brookstone," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I find myself in a predicament, and I require a discreet ally." "I am at your service, Your Grace," Lenora managed, clutching her hands behind her back to hide their trembling. "He wants me to help him give her away." "I intend to procure a ring," Arthur said, stepping closer until he was standing on the edge of her rug. "But it must be a surprise. I cannot take the lady to a jeweler." "A romantic gesture," Lenora whispered, her voice sounding like glass breaking. "She will be delighted." "The problem is the size," Arthur continued, his gaze dropping to her hands. "You are of a similar build. Might I borrow yours? To estimate?" The irony was a blade in her gut. "I am to be the model for my best friend's happiness. If you think it will help, Your Grace." "It is the only way," Arthur insisted, pulling a length of silk ribbon from his waistcoat. Lenora extended her left hand. Arthur slid his palm beneath hers, his skin warm and rough, as he supported her fingers like the finest porcelain. "Hold still," he murmured. He wrapped the ribbon around her ring finger. He was so close, she could see the flecks of gold in his grey eyes, the pulse jumping in his throat as his thumb brushed her knuckle in a slow, unnecessary caress. "You have very slender fingers," Arthur said, his voice turning rough and raw. "I'm ordinary, Your Grace," Lenora choked out. Arthur looked up, his face inches from hers, the polite Duke replaced by a man looking at her with a terrifying hunger. "There is nothing ordinary about this," he whispered, squeezing her hand in one hard, desperate press. The door handle rattled. Arthur stepped back instantly, 3 feet of cold air rushing between them just as Constance bustled back in. "Found it," Constance declared. "I hope I wasn't too long." Arthur cleared his throat, his fist clenched over the ribbon in his pocket. "Not at all. Miss Brookstone was just keeping me company." Lenora sank back onto the window seat, her finger still burning where he had touched it. She didn't know that the ribbon in his pocket wasn't an estimate. It was a promise. The pile of letters hidden beneath the floorboards of Lenora's wardrobe had grown to 4. She read them every night, but today she risked opening the newest one in the safety of the dressing room while Constance greeted a milliner downstairs. Lenora sat on the floor, the cream-colored paper trembling in her hands. This letter was a confession of hunger. "I wonder about the small things," she whispered, reading the writer's scribbled words. "The things that make up a life. I wonder if you like the rain, or if you only tolerate it because you are English." Lenora's breath hitched. "He sees the things I don't even see myself." "Do you like strawberries?" she continued, her voice trembling. "I imagine you do. They are sweet, but they stain the fingers. A beautiful mess. I should like to buy you a basket of them just to watch you eat one." Lenora let out a wet, choked laugh, the sound echoing in the empty room. "He wants to watch me eat. He wants the mess. Until then, know that every time I adjust my cravat, which makes me look like a stuffed goose, I'm doing it for you." "You're crying," a voice said. Lenora gasped, shoving the letter into her pocket so fast the paper crinkled. Constance stood in the doorway, her silk skirts rustling as she leaned against the frame. "No, my lady," Lenora stammered, standing quickly. "I only had something in my eye." "You were reading a letter," Constance said, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "And you were smiling and crying. That is a dangerous combination, Lenora." Lenora looked down at her slippers. She couldn't lie, not when her heart was still vibrating from the words on the page. "It is from a friend. He makes me laugh." "Do you love him?" Constance asked softly. Lenora touched the paper through the fabric of her gown. "He sees me, Constance. He doesn't care that I am a companion. He feels safe. I think I could love him because he belongs to me." "And what of the Duke?" Constance pressed. Lenora stiffened, the corset bones digging into her ribs. "The Duke, my lady." "I see how you look at him," Constance said, her voice dropping to a serious tone. "You stop breathing when he enters the room. Tell me the truth. What do you think of Arthur?" Lenora summoned every ounce of loyalty she possessed, forcing a bright, supportive smile. "I think he is magnificent for you. He will make you a wonderful husband. I can see it. You will have beautiful children." "He sounds perfect," Constance said dryly. "He is perfect," Lenora insisted, grabbing Constance's hands. "Any lady would be blessed to have him, but he is yours. He belongs to the sun." An hour later, Constance found the Duke in the private library. He was standing by the window, looking out at the grey London sky as if he could command the sun to appear. "Well?" Arthur asked, not turning around. "She is a fortress," Constance said, pouring herself a tea. "She listed your virtues like she was selling a prize stallion. She said you were perfect. For me." Arthur winced, his broad shoulders tensing under his coat. "She pushes me away." "She protects me," Constance corrected. "But she showed me the letter, the one about the stuffed goose." Arthur groaned, his hand going to his cravat. "Do not mock my poetry." "She said the writer makes her feel safe." Constance dropped the information like a bomb. "She mentioned strawberries. She seemed quite taken with the idea of a basket of them." Arthur went still. A slow, determined smile spread across his face. "Then tomorrow, the Duke will just have to become a little more like the writer." The following day, the sun finally broke through the clouds. Lenora was serving lemonade on the terrace, the air smelling of cut grass and impending heat. "It is a beautiful day," Arthur commented. He reached for a glass, his fingers brushing Lenora's, deliberate and lingering. "It is," Constance agreed, "though I am famished. Did you bring the biscuits?" "I did better," Arthur said, his eyes never leaving Lenora's face. He reached down and lifted a woven basket onto the table. It was piled high with bright, red, ripe strawberries, the scent of them sweet and heavy in the warm sun. Lenora froze, the pitcher of lemonade trembling in her hand. "Strawberries. I saw them at the market," Arthur said, his voice dropping to that deep, resonant tone of the letters. "They looked messy, but sweet. I thought we might enjoy the mess." He didn't offer the fruit to Constance. He turned to Lenora, holding one out, the red juice staining the tips of his fingers. "Miss Brookstone," Arthur said, his grey eyes searching hers. "Will you try the first one? I must ensure they are sweet enough for the ladies." Lenora stared at the berry, her heart pounding like a drum against her ribs. The letter, the mess, the stain. "He wants to watch me eat one." I'm fond of strawberries, Your Grace," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I had a feeling you might be," Arthur said softly, his eyes warm and pleading. She took the fruit, her fingers grazing his warm skin. As she bit into it, the sweetness exploded in her mouth, a burst of summer and truth that brought hot tears to her eyes. Arthur watched her eat, looking like a man who had finally found his way home. Lenora swallowed, the taste lingering like a vow. It wasn't a coincidence. The strawberries tasted exactly like the words in her pocket. Lady Jersey's ball was a suffocating crush of silk and heat. Lenora stood near the perimeter, her dove-grey silk gown making her a shadow among the glittering diamonds of the dance floor. "Miss Brookstone," a voice purred. Lenora turned to find Lord Blackwood blocking her path, his dark eyes scanning her with a cold, hungry precision. My lord, Lady Constance is currently dancing with the Duke. I'm not looking for Lady Constance, Blackwood said, stepping into her personal space until she was trapped against a cold marble pillar. I'm looking for you. You look wasted here. I am content, my lord, Lenora said, her chin lifting. I am a wallflower by necessity, but I am still a gentlewoman. A beautiful woman should not be content with the shadows, Blackwood murmured. He reached out, his fingers grazing the stray curl at her neck. I have a quiet townhouse in Chelsea. You would be the center of attention there, for a price. Lenora froze, the insult cutting deeper than any blade. Please let me pass, she whispered, looking frantically for Constance through the crowd. Don't be coy, Blackwood sneered, his grip tightening painfully on her bare arm. You are a penniless spinster, Lenora. Who is going to object? The Duke is too busy with the diamond to care about the pebble. Lenora gasped, the panic flaring in her chest as his fingers dug into her skin. Then, the air in the room seemed to shatter. Release her, a voice snarled. It wasn't the Duke's polite tone, it was a guttural, animal growl. Arthur stood there, his jaw clenched so hard, a muscle jumped in his cheek, his eyes black with a terrifying fury. Your Grace, Blackwood stammered, his smirk vanishing. We were just becoming acquainted. You are hurting her, Arthur said, his voice low and vibrating with violence. Remove your hand. Now, or I will break it. Blackwood let go instantly, backing away with his hands raised. I meant no offense. I did not know she was a favorite. She is under my protection. Arthur stepped forward, his broad body a wall of iron between Lenora and the rake. If you ever look at her again, I will ensure you are never welcomed in London again. Do you understand? Perfectly, Blackwood muttered, fleeing into the crowd. Arthur stood there, his chest heaving with a rage he couldn't quite leash. He spun around, his hands reaching for her arms, the exact spot Blackwood had bruised. Did he hurt you? Arthur demanded, his touch surprisingly gentle as he searched her skin. I'm fine, Lenora stammered, her knees shaking. You saved me. I would burn this ballroom to the ground before I let him touch you, Arthur vowed, his voice raw and shaking. Lenora stopped breathing, the heat coming off him overwhelming her senses. That wasn't duty. That was the writer. Arthur! Constance's voice cut through the fog. She hurried over, her eyes darting between Arthur's wild expression and Lenora's shock. People are staring. You look unwell. Arthur let go of Lenora as if she were fire, his mask slamming back into place with trembling hands. My apologies. Lord Blackwood was inappropriate. I merely defended the honor of your household, Lady Constance. Of course, Constance said loudly for the benefit of the gossips. Lenora, go to the carriage. You look faint. Later, in the dark silence of the carriage, Arthur sat opposite Constance, his fist clenched so hard the leather of his glove strained. You almost ruined everything, Constance whispered. He touched her, Arthur hissed, the rage still simmering. He treated her like a whore because she has no husband to claim her. Soon, Constance promised, reaching out to stay his hand. But tonight, you scared her, Arthur. Arthur closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the velvet. I know. He knew he had lost the right to speak to her. He couldn't go to her room. If he wanted to reach her, he would have to use the only voice she trusted. He would have to write. The rain had been falling for 3 days, turning the streets into rivers of gray sludge. Inside Fairlea House, the air was heavy with the scent of wet wool and dying lilies. Constance sat in the yellow drawing room, staring at the clock on the mantelpiece. Tick, tick, tick. Every second felt like a lie she was forced to breathe. When the doors opened, she didn't smile. She just pointed to the hard wooden chair opposite her. Close the door, Arthur. Arthur complied, looking exhausted, the circles under his eyes like dark bruises. The performance is slipping, Constance noted, her voice steady. I know. Arthur rubbed his face, his jaw tight. But every time she lowers her eyes because she thinks she isn't worthy to look at me, I want to scream. And that is the problem, Constance countered. At the ball, you looked ready to murder Lord Blackwood. People are saying the Duke is unhinged. I built a fortress of lies to keep her safe, Constance. Arthur snapped, his voice hard. If I had courted her openly, her father would have sent her to Yorkshire to scrub floors. Well, the fortress is crumbling, Constance said brutally. If my father sees the way you look at her now, he'll think she seduced you. He will ruin her. Arthur went still, the truth hitting him like a physical blow. I have done my part, Constance continued, her voice softening. But I cannot do it anymore. She thinks I love you, Arthur. She is pushing you toward me because she is loyal. She is perfect, Arthur whispered. She is miserable, Constance corrected. The time for buying safety is over. Now, we are just buying pain. Arthur looked at her, his eyes wide with a rare terror. So what do we do? If I stop coming, I lose her. No, Constance said with a sudden, frightening resolve. I'm going to break it off. I will tell my father you are cold. I will set you free. He will be furious, Arthur warned. Let him be, but once I release you, you cannot hesitate. You must catch her before she falls. Upstairs, Lenora sat on the window seat, clutching a book she wasn't reading. She could hear the muffled, intense murmur of voices from the drawing room. Are they fighting? A wave of sickness rolled through her. If they are unhappy, it's my fault. I wished for his love, and now my selfishness is poisoning my friend's heart. The library door groaned open. Arthur walked out, putting on his gloves with jerky, angry movements. He stopped dead when he saw her on the landing. Your Grace, Lenora whispered, standing up. Arthur looked at her, and for the first time he didn't check to see who was watching. It is almost over, he said. What is almost over? Lenora asked, her mind spinning. The rain, Arthur lied. But his eyes were screaming of the waiting and the distance. He took a step toward her, his hand twitching as if to trace her jaw. Do not lose faith, Miss Brookstone. Sometimes the darkest part of the night is right before the dawn. He bowed low, as if she were a queen, and disappeared down the stairs. That evening, the 6th letter arrived, creased and worn as if carried in a pocket for hours. Lenora sat by her candle, her heart hammering as she read the confession. I am tired of wearing a mask, the writer had scribbled. I built a wall to keep you safe, but the wall has become a cage. The distance is a lie. The wall is made of paper, and very soon I'm going to strike a match and burn it all down. Lenora read the words 3 times, her breath hitching. Wait for me in the ashes. The pieces were locking together. The Duke's dawn and the writer's match were the same flame. But instead of joy, a terrifying thrill of danger shot through her. If a Duke burns down a wall, someone always gets hurt. And she feared, more than anything, it would be Constance. 2 days after the burn the wall letter, the explosion finally happened. It was Tuesday, the day Arthur usually brought flowers for Constance, the day the house was usually filled with the polite, suffocating murmur of courtship. But today, the voices in the downstairs drawing room were raised in a way that made the fine china rattle. Lenora was in the library when the shouting started. She ran into the hallway just as the drawing room doors flew open. Arthur backed out into the foyer, looking pale and grim. Constance stood in the doorway, her face a mask of cold fury. Do not return, Your Grace, Constance announced, her voice ringing off the marble floors. We do not suit. I have told my father. It is finished. Arthur didn't argue. He turned, his gaze catching Lenora's on the stairs for 3 dangerous, silent seconds before he walked out the front door. The house erupted. Lord Fairlie's screams echoed from the study, and the servants began to hiss in the shadows, but Lenora fled to her room, the world spinning. That night, a scratch at the door brought the 7th letter, the last piece of the puzzle. The wall is down, Arthur had written. Meet me? Tomorrow night, at the stroke of 10, in the conservatory. Lenora stared at the signature. Arthur. A wave of hot, suffocating humiliation washed over her. They knew. They both knew. She didn't think. She marched down the hall and threw open Constance's door without knocking. Lenora! Constance jumped, dropping her hairbrush onto the vanity. Did you know? Lenora demanded, her voice a weapon, her chest heaving as she held up the crumpled paper. Constance froze, her eyes darting to the letter and then to Lenora's shattered face. Lenora, please, did you know? Lenora screamed, the sob finally ripping out of her throat. This whole time, when I told you I was falling in love with him, when I told you how much it hurt to look at him because he belonged to you, you knew. Yes, Constance whispered, her shoulders slumping. I knew. Lenora collapsed against the doorframe, covering her mouth to stifle a cry of pure agony. I trusted you. I thought you were protecting me, but you were laughing at the foolish companion who thought a duke could love her. No! Constance rushed forward, grabbing Lenora's hands despite her struggle. Never laughing, Lenora. Never. Then why? Lenora cried, her eyes burning with betrayal. Why let me feel like a thief in my own home? Why let me mourn a man I thought I couldn't have? Because it was the only way to keep you here, Constance said desperately. If the Duke of Solihull had approached you openly, my father would have called you a temptress. He would have fired you instantly and sent you away without a reference. Constance squeezed her hands, her own tears spilling over. He begged me, Lenora. He said, let me pretend to court you, just so I can breathe the same air as her. He did it to keep a roof over your head. Lenora pulled her hands away, wiping her face as she drew herself up to her full height. The cold, devastating dignity of her voice made Constance flinch. What you did was cruel, Lenora said, her voice shaking but firm. You may call it protection, but to me, it felt like a game where I was the only one blindfolded. A friend tells the truth, Constance, even when it is dangerous. I'm so sorry, Constance whispered, looking down at the floor in shame. I only saw the romance. I didn't see the pain. I am humiliated, Lenora admitted, her voice breaking. I feel like a fool. You are not a fool, Constance insisted, reaching into her drawer to produce a brass key. You are the woman a duke just destroyed his reputation for. He made himself the villain today so he could come to you with clean hands. She held the key out, the key to the conservatory. He is waiting. He is terrified that you will hate him for the lie. Please, do not let his silence be for nothing. Lenora looked at the key, then at the letter. The love she had nurtured in the dark was still there, burning beneath the wreckage of her pride. I will go, Lenora said softly, taking the cold metal into her palm. But not for him, and not for you. I will go because I deserve to hear the truth from his own lips. The conservatory was a glass cage filled with shadows and the heavy scent of jasmine. The rain drummed a relentless, punishing rhythm against the roof, drowning out the world beyond the glass. Lenora stepped inside, her key clutched so tightly the metal bit into her palm. Arthur stood at the far end, facing the black, wet garden, his posture rigid as a man bracing for a firing squad. The click of the latch was sharp in the humid air. Arthur went still, but he didn't turn. I was terrified you wouldn't come, he said to his own reflection in the glass. And now that you are here, I'm terrified to turn around. Why? Lenora asked, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. Because I'm afraid I will see hatred, Arthur whispered, and I do not think I can survive that. He took a jagged breath and slowly, agonizingly, he turned. Lenora's breath hitched. He looked wrecked, his auburn hair disheveled and his eyes rimmed with a raw, bleeding apology. I am a liar, Lenora, Arthur said, his voice cracking. I have lied to society. I have lied to your best friend. I have lied to you every day I walked into that house. You made me a fool, Lenora said with a quiet, crushing dignity. You and Constance moved me around like a piece on a chessboard. I moved you to keep you on the board. Arthur's voice rose, desperate and passionate. Do you think I enjoyed watching you pour tea for another woman while I bit my tongue until it bled? He closed the distance between them, stopping inches away, smelling of rain and the sandalwood from his letters. I didn't want a courtship, Lenora. I wanted you, but the world sees a penniless girl and it sees prey. He reached out, his trembling fingers hovering near her face. I had to become the villain in everyone's story, so I could be the hero in yours. The only thing that kept me breathing was the look in your eyes when you read about the strawberry." Lenora felt her anger draining, replaced by an ache that made her knees weak. "I'm 26 years old, Arthur. I'm not a debutante, fresh from the schoolroom." Arthur blinked, confused by her sudden strength. "Lenora? I've scrubbed floors and mended hems," she said, looking him dead in the eye. "I'm capable. I do not need to be managed. If you had trusted me with the truth, we could have carried the burden together." Arthur stared at her, stunned. "You are right," he whispered, shame coloring his cheeks. "I was arrogant. I thought I had to save you, but you are stronger than I am." "I am," Lenora agreed, a sad smile touching her lips. "I am hurt that you didn't trust me, Arthur. But when I read your letters, I didn't feel managed. I felt found." Arthur let out a sound, half sob, half laugh, his ducal composure shattering completely. He swayed, his eyes searching hers, desperate for a sign of mercy. "Lenora," he rasped, his voice trembling, "please, hug me. I feel like if you stand that far away for 1 second longer, I'm going to fall." Lenora didn't hesitate. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist, and Arthur collapsed into her. He buried his face in her neck, crushing her against him as he shook with the weight of his relief. There was no kiss. It was too raw for that. It was just two souls finally colliding in the dark, holding each other up while the rain washed the lies away. The rain had stopped, but the air in the conservatory remained thick with the scent of damp earth and the heavy silence of two people who had finally stopped fighting a war. Arthur didn't let go of her immediately. He held her until his breathing slowed, and when he finally pulled back, he stayed in her space, his hands cupping her face. His thumbs traced the wet tracks of tears on her cheeks. "We cannot stay here," Arthur whispered, his voice steady with a cold, sharp determination. "The sun rises in 6 hours. When it does, I intend to be the man who ruins Lord Fairlie's breakfast." Lenora managed a weak, watery smile. "He will challenge you to a duel." "Let him," Arthur said, his eyes darkening. "I have wanted to shoot something for months." He dropped his hands and reached into his waistcoat pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Lenora's heart stopped. It was the same pocket he had used for the silk ribbon weeks ago. "You said you needed to measure it for Constance," Lenora started, her voice shaking. "I never said it was for Constance," Arthur corrected gently. "I said it was for the lady I intended to marry. I said it must fit perfectly." He clicked the box open to reveal an antique sapphire, dark as the midnight sky and surrounded by a halo of small, fierce diamonds. "This is the Weatherford sapphire," Arthur explained, his voice hushed. "It has been sitting in a vault, waiting for a woman with the strength to carry it." He took her left hand, the same hand he had memorized with ribbon, and slid the cold metal onto her finger. It settled at the base, fitting her perfectly. "Will you do me the extraordinary honor of letting me love you in the light?" he asked. Lenora looked at the ring, then at the man who had written her poetry in the dark. "Yes," she whispered. Arthur pressed a kiss to the sapphire, sealing the vow. "Good. Now we must move. I have a carriage waiting and my mother is expecting us." Lenora blinked, pulling her hand back slightly. "Your mother? She told me if I didn't marry the girl with the green eyes, she would disown me," Arthur admitted with a grim smile. "You will stay with her tonight. It is the only place you will be safe." "I cannot just run away," Lenora said, her chin lifting. "I am not a thief, Arthur. I will not sneak out like I have stolen the silver." "Lenora, it is dangerous." "No," she cut him off, her face setting into a mask of quiet resolve. "I am the daughter of a baron. I will go upstairs, pack my trunk, and tomorrow morning I will resign. I will leave through the front door, not the back." Arthur looked at her, seeing the steel in her spine that poverty hadn't been able to crush. He realized then that she wasn't asking for a title. She was asking for respect. "Very well," Arthur said, nodding slowly. "But I will wait in the carriage. If you are not out that door by 9 o'clock, I'm coming in with the footman." 9 o'clock, Lenora agreed. She turned to the door, then stopped, looking back at the man who had finally made her visible. "Arthur, thank you for the strawberries." Arthur smiled, a genuine, boyish smile that lit up the gloom. "Get some sleep, my love. Tomorrow, the war begins." The grandfather clock in the hallway struck the quarter hour. Dong, dong. It was 8:45 a.m. Lenora stood in her small room, her trunk packed with 3 grey dresses, her father's portrait, and a bundle of 7 letters. She didn't put on the sapphire ring. She hid her bare finger inside a glove, refusing to use the Duke's protection as a shield before she had faced her own past. She walked down the stairs, the house vibrating with the tension of the previous day's scandal. She knocked on the heavy oak door of the study. "Enter!" Lord Fairlie's voice was a bark. Lenora pushed the door open. The Earl sat behind his desk, nursing a cup of coffee and a foul temper. "Ah," he sneered, his eyes narrowing. "The shadow. I was just about to send for you." "Good morning, my lord," Lenora said. She did not curtsy. Fairlie slammed his cup down. "Constance has locked herself in her room. She's thrown away a dukedom, and I suspect you've been poisoning her ear with your spinster nonsense." "Lady Constance has a heart, my lord," Lenora said calmly. "She refused to marry a man she did not love. That is not poison. That is courage." "Courage! It is stupidity." Fairlie stood up, his face a mottled purple. "You are a leech on this family, just as your father was a leech on society." Lenora went still, the insult stinging, but it couldn't wound her. Not anymore. "My father died with his honor. He never forced a woman to marry for money." "You are dismissed." Fairlie pointed a shaking finger at the door. "Get out of my house. You will leave without a reference. Let us see how much honor you have when you are starving in the gutter." "You cannot dismiss me, my lord," Lenora said softly. "I just did." "No," Lenora corrected. "You cannot dismiss me because I resigned 10 minutes ago. My trunk is already in the hall." She looked around the dark wood and heavy curtains, the cage she had lived in for 3 years. "I thank you for the roof you provided, even if the price was my invisibility." "Good day, Lord Fairlie." Lenora walked through the foyer, leaving the sound of Fairlie's roaring behind. The butler, Mr. Henderson, opened the front door, and bright morning sunlight flooded the hall. "Shall I call a hackney, Miss Lenora?" Henderson asked kindly. "That will not be necessary," Lenora said. "I believe my transport is waiting." She stepped out onto the front steps. The street was busy, but every eye was fixed on the gleaming black barouche parked directly in front of the house. A ducal crest was painted in gold on the door, and 4 white horses stamped impatiently. Arthur stood beside the open door, ignoring the stares of the crowd. He snapped his pocket watch shut. 9 o'clock. You are punctual." The butler behind her gasped. Lenora walked down the steps, feeling the weight of the scandal that was about to break. But she didn't care. Arthur walked up to meet her halfway. He didn't bow. He took her gloved hand, tucked it firmly into the crook of his arm, and covered it with his own. "Is it done?" he asked quietly, leaning in so only she could hear. "It is done," Lenora whispered. "I resigned." "Good," Arthur said. He looked over her shoulder at Lord Fairlie, who had appeared on the steps, red-faced and sputtering. Arthur gave a curt, dismissive nod, a duke acknowledging a lesser man, and turned his back. "Come, my love," Arthur said, leading her toward the carriage. "My mother is waiting for breakfast, and she hates cold toast." He helped her into the velvet interior, ignoring the stunned silence of the street. As the door closed and the carriage lurched forward, Lenora looked back one last time. She saw Fairlie standing on the steps, his mouth open. She saw the house getting smaller. Arthur took her hand and stripped off the glove, revealing the sapphire ring sparkling in the sunlight. He kissed her knuckles, his eyes warm and triumphant. "You are safe," he promised, "and you are seen." The carriage ride was a blur of cobbled streets and silent, desperate hand-holding. When they finally pulled up to Solihull House, Lenora looked out the window at a palace of white stone. "She is terrifying, isn't she?" Lenora whispered. her thumb brushing the sapphire on her finger. "My mother?" Arthur laughed, a low rumble in his chest. "She is a dragon, but she has been complaining for 10 years that I am too boring. You, my love, are the most interesting thing I've ever brought home." They entered the drawing room where the Dowager Duchess sat by the fire, holding a cane like a scepter. Arthur led Lenora to the center of the rug, his hand never leaving hers. "Mother," Arthur said, his voice ringing with pride. "This is Lenora Brookstone." The Dowager didn't smile. She stood up slowly, tapping her cane as she circled Lenora like a hawk. Lenora didn't shrink. She lifted her chin, meeting the older woman's gaze. "Green," the Dowager muttered. "I beg your pardon," Lenora asked softly. "He told me your eyes were the color of a forest after rain," the Dowager said dryly. "He wrote me 3 pages about them. I thought he was hallucinating, but I see he was merely accurate." Lenora blushed, while Arthur feigned a sudden interest in the plasterwork on the ceiling. "You made a mess of it, didn't you?" The Dowager looked at Arthur. "The whole town is probably burning down. Lord Fairley will be calling for blood." "I don't care," Arthur said, stepping closer to Lenora. "Let it burn. My son has been a statue for 30 years, Miss Brookstone," the Dowager admitted, her expression softening. She pointed her cane at Arthur. "He looks alive today. He looks like a man who has finally woken up." She reached out and patted Lenora's cheek, a surprisingly gentle gesture. "You are welcome here. And if Lord Fairley tries to cause trouble, send him to me. I know exactly where his skeletons are buried." An hour later, they sat on a stone bench in the private garden, the high walls blocking out the noise of London. "Are you happy?" Arthur asked. He sounded vulnerable again, the bravado of the morning replaced by the man who just wanted to ensure he hadn't broken her. "I'm terrified," Lenora admitted honestly. "I'm terrified that one day you will realize you married the companion." Arthur took her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "Listen to me. I didn't fall in love with a companion. I fell in love with the woman who reads history in the corner while everyone else gossips. I fell in love with the woman who laughs at my terrible poetry." He leaned his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her skin. "The whispers will stop, but this is the only thing that is real. You and me, the writer and the reader." Lenora closed her eyes, letting the truth of it settle into her bones. She wasn't the shadow anymore. She was the sun. "Arthur?" "Yes. I think," she smiled against his lips, "I think I would like to try those strawberries again, but this time without the audience." Arthur laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that echoed through the garden. "As you wish, my love. As you wish." The library at the Solihull country estate was different from the one in London. It was flooded with light, the windows thrown open to a summer breeze that smelled of lavender and ripe strawberries. Lenora sat at the massive oak desk, scanning a letter written in messy, enthusiastic handwriting. "She is in Florence," Lenora announced, her green eyes bright. Arthur looked up from the sofa, his smile easy and worn in. "Florence? Is she still traveling with that Italian count?" "She says he isn't a count," Lenora laughed. "She says he is a poet with a vineyard, and she's never been happier. She claims the pasta alone is worth the scandal." Arthur chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm glad Constance found her vineyard. She was never meant for a London ballroom." He stood up and walked over to the desk, leaning against the wood to look down at his wife. Lenora didn't look like a shadow anymore. Her cheeks were flush with health, her grey dresses replaced by soft blue muslin. She looked like a woman who was adored. "And what about you, Your Grace?" Arthur asked softly, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "Do you miss the ballrooms?" "Not for a moment," Lenora said, placing her hand over his. "I have everything I need right here." Arthur's gaze dropped to her other hand, the one resting protectively on the gentle swell of her stomach. The prophecy was coming true. Little boys with his chin and her hair. His playfulness vanished, replaced by a look of profound, terrifying love. He covered her hand with his own huge palm. "I still worry," he admitted, his voice low. I worry I'll wake up in that carriage, watching the rain, wishing I had the courage to speak to you." Lenora stood up, no longer the timid companion, but the Duchess. She reached into the desk drawer and pulled out a small velvet-bound book, opening it to the very first letter he had ever sent. "You aren't dreaming, Arthur," she whispered. "You wrote us into existence." Arthur looked at the ink, the first "one who watches" letter, and then at her. "I don't have to write anymore," he said, pulling her close and resting his chin on her head. "I don't have to watch from the shadows. I have the hearth." Lenora closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him. Soap, ink, and home. "You do have one more letter to write," she murmured against his chest. "To whom?" Arthur pulled back, raising an eyebrow. "To the nursery," Lenora smiled, her eyes dancing with mischief. "We need to order a stuffed goose for the baby." Arthur threw his head back and laughed, the sound filling the room and chasing away the last ghosts of the lonely man he used to be. He kissed her, long and deep, in the center of the sunlit library. He was no longer the one who watches. He was the one who lived.
I watched you laugh beside her light, your shadow lean the other way. I folded hope into my hands and taught my heart to look away.
You never saw where my eyes went, never felt the pull I fought. I stood too close to what you feared, just to have the love I saw.
They whispered things I didn't ask, I listened anyway.
Every smile you gave to her told me what you'd never say. I learned your silences by name, your breath when rooms grew small. I borrowed time through borrowed ties, afraid to risk it all. I loved you wrong, I loved you quiet, loved you standing in between. You thought my heart was hers to hold, but you were all I'd ever seen. Every step I took toward her was just to stand where you would be. I loved you wrong, I loved you quiet, now hear the truth.
You never touched my hand too long, never broke what felt so clear. So I named my pain as truth and dressed my doubt as fear.
If I'd spoken once, just once, I might have changed your mind. But courage came too late for me, and love stayed undefined.
I loved you wrong, I loved you quiet, loved you standing in between.
You thought my heart was hers to hold, but you were all I'd ever seen. Every step I took toward her was just to stand where you would be. I loved you wrong, I loved you quiet, now hear the truth you couldn't see.
I smiled when you said her name, like it didn't bruise my chest. I became so good at letting go, I forgot to want the rest.
I memorized your every glance, the way you turned away. I lived inside the almost of every word I couldn't say.
If time could bend, I'd break the lie, I'd burn the space between. No borrowed moments, no disguises, no third heart in the scene. I'd say it plain, I'd say it loud before you learn to leave, before you taught your heart to live without believing me.
So tell me now when it's too late, was I ever wrong to feel? Or did I read the truth too soon, before it could be real?
I loved you every borrowed night, every breath I couldn't claim. I wore my silence like a vow and lost you all the same.
I loved you wrong, I loved you quiet, loved you standing in between. You thought my heart was hers to hold, but you were all I'd ever seen. Every step I took toward her was just to stand where you would be. I loved you wrong, I loved you quiet. Now hear the truth you couldn't see.
They said he wore the mask because of a disfigurement. Some said it was vanity, others penance. But whatever the reason, no one had seen Lord Hawthorne's face in 10 years, not even his late wife. The letter came on a Thursday, sealed in black wax, the kind used for mourning. Marianne Huxley read it once, then again. Its language was formal, but unmistakable. You are to marry the Marquis of Hawthorne. The ceremony is to take place within the fortnight. It was not a request. It was an arrangement. Her brother's gambling debts had reached beyond their station, and the price of his life had come wrapped in silk stationery. Marianne did not scream nor weep. She simply folded the letter and placed it in her lap, staring at the fire until it cracked too loudly. By the end of the week, she sat alone in a carriage winding its way through the woods of Blackmore Vale, the sky gray as tarnished pewter. Her only company was a nervous maid named Lillian, and the growing certainty that her life was no longer her own. Hawthorne Hall appeared suddenly, like a bruise in the landscape, its stone facade worn and unreadable. Not a single candle burned in its windows. The footman who greeted them was silent. The staff bowed but did not speak. And when Marianne was shown to her chambers, it was Lillian who whispered what none dared say aloud. They call him the Phantom, miss. They say he walks the halls after midnight, that he dines alone, that he speaks only to the housekeeper. Marianne said nothing. She merely looked out at the mist-laced trees and tried not to shiver. The wedding took place the next morning. No guests, no music, only the creaking of wood and the scent of lavender laid beneath her hem. He stood at the altar like a shadow, a tall figure in black, gloved hands, and the famed ivory mask that covered him from brow to jaw. The vicar's voice was a distant hum. She spoke her vows with measured clarity, her voice the only warmth in the room. He did not touch her hand. He did not kiss her cheek. He only bowed slightly, as though acknowledging a contract sealed, and left the chapel before she could rise from the altar. That night, she dined alone. A week passed. She heard his footsteps outside her door at night, slow even, never hesitating. Once, she thought he paused, as if listening. But when she opened the door, the hallway was empty. Another time, she found a book on her writing desk, poems by Tennyson, her favorite. The binding was worn, and a dry violet had been pressed into the last page. She hadn't told anyone about the poem she loved. She hadn't mentioned it since her mother died. She held the book to her chest, but said nothing. On the 10th evening, she descended the western stair and found him in the gallery. He stood before a portrait of a woman, fair, soft-featured, young. His mask was the same. his gloved hands folded behind his back. When he heard her steps, he did not startle. "That was my sister," he said, voice smooth but distant. "She died in winter. Too kind for this world." Marianne remained near the doorway. Was it recent? 8 years. I still hear her laughter on cold mornings. She nodded, unsure what else to say. "I should not have married you," he added. "Then why did you?" He turned halfway, the firelight brushing against the side of his mask. "Because I owed your brother mercy. And you were the only thing he had worth saving." Marianne's breath caught. Before she could speak, he bowed and vanished through a hidden door in the wall. The next day, it rained. The kind of cold rain that silenced even the birds. Lillian had taken ill, and Marianne wandered the library alone. She did not hear him enter until he spoke. "Do you find the books adequate?" She turned slowly. He stood by the fireplace, distant as ever. "They're wonderful," she said, "though many pages are annotated. In your hand?" He nodded. "You study poetry and medicine and astronomy," she said, walking toward him. "But you live like a ghost." He didn't answer, only looked toward the rain-laced window. "Did something happen to your face?" she asked, gently. "Or to your heart?" He moved then, closer than before, not touching, but near enough she could see the tension in his throat. "Both," he said. She did not press. Instead, she stepped beside him, shoulder to shoulder, and for a full minute they listened to the rain. That night, her door opened. She did not stir, but in the moonlight, she saw his shadow cross the room. He placed something on her nightstand, a locket, her mother's, the one she'd lost on the journey here. He stood there, mask gleaming faintly for a long moment. Then he turned and left, saying only, "Good night, Marianne." And for the first time since she arrived, she felt something bloom in the hollowness of her chest. Not love, not yet, but something brave enough to stay. Marianne woke with the locket still curled in her palm. The silver had grown warm against her skin, as if it had slept beside her too. The candle had long since burned down, but she could still see where his shadow had stood, where he had looked at her and said her name. A name he had not used until that moment, a name that had never sounded softer. She rose slowly, eyes sweeping toward the door. It was closed now, but the air felt different, as though someone had left behind a thought that refused to leave. She clutched the locket tighter, already wondering when she might hear his voice again. At breakfast, she did what she had not dared before. She asked if Lord Hawthorne might be joining her. The butler's brow creased, not rudely, but with something like surprise. "His lordship does not take meals in company," he said. "Not even with his wife?" she asked. He hesitated, then offered a tight nod of apology. "Especially not." She took her tea in the conservatory, where the windows glowed with frost, and the silence pressed like velvet. She ate little, but lingered long, waiting for a step that did not come, a shadow that did not pass. She told herself she was only observing, but her heart knew better. It had already begun to reach. By afternoon, she wandered toward the western corridor again, drawn by something she could not name. The gallery was empty, save for the hush of old portraits and pale light striping the floor. But someone had been there. A book had been moved. A candle had been burned halfway down, and on the edge of the velvet chaise, a single glove, black, creased at the fingers, had been left behind. Marianne looked at it for a long moment before picking it up. It was still warm. She turned, heart quickening, and found the hallway empty behind her. And yet, she felt watched. Not ominously, but almost tenderly, as though someone had stepped into the light just long enough to be seen, then slipped away again. That evening, she found him in the library, not masked, not startled, but still cloaked in a silence of his own making. He stood before the hearth, with one arm resting against the mantel. When she entered, He turned, not fully, but enough to acknowledge her. "You left your glove," she said, holding it out. His gaze dropped to her hand, then back to her face. "Did you think I meant for you to find it?" She hesitated. "I hoped you had." His lips curved faintly. "I forget you're braver than most." She stepped closer, slowly. "And you forget I'm not afraid of phantoms. Not when they return lockets to girls they barely know." That made him pause. He reached for the glove. Their fingers brushed, and neither of them moved away. He turned from her then, not out of coldness, but as if her presence had startled something soft in him. He walked toward the shelves and trailed a gloved finger along the spines. "My mother used to say, 'Every book hides a heart, waiting to be read aloud,'" he murmured. "And do you believe that?" she asked. He paused. Not until now. Marianne felt the air shift again, thicker, warmer. She joined him by the window. Rain had begun to tap gently against the glass. "Do you read them all?" she asked. "Even the ones that ache?" He nodded once. "Especially those." Her breath caught at that. Because wasn't she just such a book? Dog-eared by sorrow. Annotated in ink only grief could write. And somehow he kept reading. Later that night a knock came at her door. Not the silence of his footsteps. This was deliberate. She opened it, candle in hand. He stood there, mask in one hand, the other still gloved. "Come walk with me," he said. No explanation, no apology, just a quiet invitation. She stepped into the corridor beside him. They moved without destination, each hallway more shadowed than the last. "Do you ever tire of silence?" she asked. "Only when it means nothing," he said. "With you, it means everything." Her heart stuttered. They paused by a stained glass window where moonlight fractured into pale blues and purples. He looked at her, not her face, not her dress, but her. "I've been alone a long time," he said, "and I'm afraid I don't know how to be anything else." She didn't speak. She simply reached up, brushing a loose curl from her temple, a gesture so simple it made him exhale, as if something heavy had lifted. "You've never asked about the fire," he said. "I thought you'd tell me when it no longer hurt," she replied. He turned to her then, fully. No mask, no curtain of avoidance. And in his eyes was the story, the sorrow, the shadow of a man who had nearly let himself disappear. "I didn't expect you to be kind," he whispered. "Nor did I expect you to stay." Marianne's throat tightened. "And yet, here I am." He stepped closer. No sudden movement. Just a hand, rising slowly to rest over hers. It was the first time he had touched her without necessity. "You make me feel seen," he said. She shook her head gently. "You make yourself seen. I only refuse to look away." Then, softly, without announcement, he leaned forward. Their lips met with a hush of two silences, finally speaking. It was not dramatic. It was not grand. It was honest, and that made it beautiful. When he pulled back, he lingered, forehead brushing hers, his hand still on hers as if he feared she might vanish. But she didn't. She stayed, and in that staying, something in him began to breathe again. They stood in the dim corridor until the candle burned low, neither speaking, neither needing to. What had been fear had become stillness. What had been avoidance had become peace. What had been two people broken now held the shape of something almost whole. But outside the corridor, beyond the hush of candlelight and quiet breath, the rain struck harder against the glass. It reminded her that night would end, that morning would come, and in the daylight, feelings could tremble beneath the weight of reason. She wondered if kindness would still look the same when the world returned to its sharpness. He had let her in, but how deep, and for how long? She wanted to believe the moment would hold, but deep down she knew something still waited to be tested. Not everything survived the light. Morning came too soon. The sky had turned from bruised indigo to washed-out gray, and the corridor outside her door was quiet. too quiet. No footsteps, no echo of his retreat. The candle that had lit their kiss was gone, and in its place, only the memory of warmth lingered against her palm. Marianne dressed slowly, as though each layer might shield her from the weight of expectation. She thought he might appear at breakfast, but when she entered the conservatory it was set for one. One plate, one cup, one silence pressing down harder than the rain ever had. She sat, untouched toast on porcelain, and wondered if intimacy had frightened him more than solitude ever had. The staff were courteous but guarded, as if sensing the air had changed, but unsure which way the wind would blow. Even Lillian avoided her gaze, though she smiled too much, as though trying to say, "You're the mistress now." But Marianne did not feel like a mistress. She felt like a question still waiting for its answer. Mid-morning passed in a haze of pacing and half-read pages. She wandered the halls they had walked together. Every corner seemed to echo with him. The place where he'd spoken of silence. The window where moonlight had softened his eyes. The place where he had said, "I make him feel seen." And yet, he was nowhere to be found. It wasn't until just before dusk that a folded note appeared beneath her door. No seal, no name, but she knew the hand. She unfolded it with trembling fingers, eyes scanning the slanted ink. "Meet me where the ivy climbs beyond the chapel wall, if you still wish to." Her heart kicked against her ribs. There was no signature, no assurance, but there was hope. She wrapped herself in her shawl and went without hesitation. The path was slick with rain, the stones dark as ink. She reached the old chapel, breath quick, the ivy catching on her sleeve. And there, half in shadow, half in light, stood the man she had kissed and never truly known. He wore no mask, not tonight, not with her. His hair was damp, his expression unreadable. For a moment, they simply stared. Then quietly, he spoke. "I'm not sure what I'm doing." She stepped forward. "Neither am I." His voice dropped lower. "I've spent years hiding in silence, and now I fear I have no language left for this." She reached for his hand, bare now, chilled from the air. "Then let's write something new." He looked at her, as if the weight of those words had stunned him, as if they were permission he hadn't dared ask for. And then, slowly, like something ancient unfolding, he pulled her into his arms and let his forehead rest against hers. They stood like that for a long time, as though the silence between them had taken root. Then he stepped back just enough to see her face. "I don't know what comes next," he admitted, "but I know I don't want to walk it alone." She smiled, through the damp, through the doubt. "You won't." He took her hand again, as if to seal the words. "Will you choose me again, Marianne? Not because of what we survived, but for who I am now." She nodded slowly. "I choose you, and I'll keep choosing you, as long as you keep showing up without the mask." And he let out the kind of breath that sounded like it had waited a lifetime. And then, without ceremony, without fear, he kissed her again, not out of surprise, but reverence, a sealing of something already formed. That night, they did not dine apart. They walked the halls not as strangers, but as something close to whole. And when morning came again, it did not steal anything away. It brought light to what had begun in shadow. Because some love does not vanish in daylight. It stays, it endures, it unmasks us and calls us home.
If you believe love can break a heart of steel, comment "steel" below.
She thought she had found safety, a gentle man, a quiet marriage, a life without fear. She told herself she loved him, even if her heart felt empty. But sometimes the men we think will protect us are the ones who break us. And sometimes the man we fear the most is the one who will love us deeper than anyone else. But Evelyn Bellin's love story was never hers to choose. Her father, Victor Bellin, was drowning in debts he could not repay, and when the banks turned their backs, he struck a bargain with New York's most feared syndicate. The price was not money. It was his only daughter. She would marry Adrian Morello, the coldest member of the Morello dynasty, the eldest son of the city's most dangerous family. Her fate was sealed before she even reached the altar. Evelyn Bellin sat in her sun-drenched bedroom, a book untouched in her hands. The engagement ring on her finger felt heavy. It was a simple diamond, nothing like the extravagant jewels of the socialites in the newspapers. Thomas had placed it there with a soft smile. He was kind. He was gentle. He was safe. She watched him from her window now, standing in the garden below. He was talking to a gardener, his shoulders relaxed. He was everything her father was not. Thomas was calm, he was predictable. She loved him because he was not a storm. Her life had been a series of violent gusts of her father's desperate schemes and hushed arguments with angry men. Thomas was a safe harbor. She repeated the words to herself like a prayer. I love him. I love Thomas. Her heart, however, remained a still, quiet lake. It was not a violent, passionate love. It was the love of a shipwreck survivor for the small island they washed ashore on. It was a love born of need and exhaustion. She told herself that was enough. She told herself that was what love really was. A quiet life, a gentle hand. No more fear. She clung to this idea, a fragile shield against the world outside her window. 3 months earlier, her father, Victor Bellin, had walked through the doors of the Morello family's private club. The air was thick with the scent of cigars and expensive whiskey. Victor's hands shook as he was led to a back room where Giovanni Morello sat, a cigar held between 2 fingers. He did not look up. Giovanni? Victor began, his voice barely a whisper. I have nowhere else to go. Giovanni Morello finally looked at him. His eyes were like polished stones, hard and unreadable. He had been a close friend of Victor's father. That had been decades ago. You chose the hard way, Victor, Giovanni said, his voice a low rumble. I told you not to dabble with those fools. I told you where the true money was. You wanted to be a legitimate man. Now, look where it brought you. Victor's face crumpled. The banks, they're calling in the notes. Everything is gone. The house, the business, everything. They'll take it all. I can't. He trailed off, unable to say the words. Giovanni took a long drag from his cigar. I know a man who can help you, a friend of mine. He will wipe your slate clean. Victor's eyes widened with a flicker of hope. Anything. I'll pay anything. Giovanni shook his head. The price is not money, Victor. My friend wants a wife for his son. He wants a certain kind of girl. From a good, respectable family. One who has not been tainted by the kind of life we lead. He paused, his gaze fixed on Victor. He wants your daughter. He wants Evelyn. Victor's face went white. My daughter? I can't. She's to be married to another. Giovanni leaned forward. You have a choice. Your reputation, your life, or your daughter. But you'll be a very poor man, a very dead man, if you don't accept this deal. He watched as Victor's shoulders slumped. The light went out of his eyes. Evelyn, she's my everything, Victor whispered, but the words were a hollow plea. The wedding morning was a blur of silk and lace. Evelyn stood before the mirror in her wedding gown, a magnificent white dress with intricate beading. Her reflection was a stranger. She looked beautiful. She did not feel it. Are you all right, my dear? Her mother asked, her voice soft with worry. Evelyn forced a smile. Just nerves. Every bride has them. Her mother smoothed the train of her gown. Thomas is such a good man. You are so lucky. Evelyn nodded, the lie tasting like ash on her tongue. Her father, Victor, entered the room, his eyes scanning the floor, the walls, anything but his daughter's face. He clasped her hands, his grip clammy and weak. "You are so beautiful, my little star," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He leaned in and kissed her cheek, but he did not meet her eyes. She felt the lie in his touch, the guilt. She looked at her reflection again, at the bright-eyed girl in the mirror. A perfect bride, a perfect lie. Downstairs, Thomas waited. He was dressed in a sleek tuxedo, a calm, patient smile on his lips. His friends clapped him on the shoulder, their voices loud and celebratory. Thomas looked at the clock, at the door. A flicker of something cold, something possessive crossed his face for a split second, a crack in his gentle mask. But then it was gone. He looked up the stairs, and his smile returned, wide and inviting. He was ready to claim his prize. The organ music swelled through the grand hall. Evelyn walked down the aisle on her father's arm. The hall was filled with the city's most elite. They were all here to witness the perfect wedding of a perfect couple. She saw Thomas waiting for her, his smile a beacon of reassurance. She reached the altar, her hand in his. The priest began to speak, his voice a drone in the vast space. Then, a sudden loud noise. The heavy wooden doors of the church burst open, slamming against the walls. A hush fell over the crowd. Giovanni Morello stepped into the aisle, a silent army of men behind him. They were dressed in dark, expensive suits, their faces impassive. Giovanni looked impossibly calm, a small, knowing smile on his face. The guests gasped, a wave of whispers rippling through the hall. Victor Belon's knees buckled. He looked at Giovanni, then at his daughter. His face was a canvas of pure terror. Giovanni walked slowly down the aisle, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He stopped before the altar and looked at Victor. His voice, when it came, was a low rumble that carried across the hushed crowd. "This was not our agreement, Victor." And then, Adrian Morello appeared. He stepped out from behind his father, silent. The guests held their breath. He was impossibly tall, his shoulders broad under his dark suit. His face was a study in cold, perfect bone structure, sharp and unforgiving. His eyes, a shade of stormy gray, swept over the crowd. He did not look at his father. He did not look at Victor. He looked directly at Evelyn. His presence was not a statement, it was a command. He was more intimidating in his stillness than his father was in his movement. Evelyn stood frozen, her hands still in Thomas's. He tried to pull her closer, but his grip was weak. Adrian Morello reached out and took her arm. He did not ask, he did not hesitate. He simply took. His touch was firm, not violent. He pulled her away from Thomas, a shocking public claim. Thomas's calm facade shattered. "Get your hands off her," he snarled, a viciousness in his voice that Evelyn had never heard before. He lunged at Adrian, but Adrian was faster. He simply shifted his weight, and Thomas stumbled. Adrian then effortlessly grabbed Thomas's arm and twisted it behind his back, a silent, brutal show of force. The crowd gasped again. Thomas grunted in pain, his face contorted in a mix of fury and helplessness. Victor Bellin stood by, a broken statue. He could not speak. He could not move. The priest, the wedding party, the guests, they all watched in horrified silence. Adrian's men moved forward, forming a wall between the altar and the guests. Evelyn was pulled away, her beautiful wedding gown a stark contrast to the violence of the moment. She was dragged away from the altar, away from the man she thought would save her, into the dark embrace of the man who had claimed her. The silence was deafening. The humiliation was absolute. She was pushed into the back of a black sedan. The leather was cold against her bare skin. Adrian got in next to her. The door closed with a heavy thud, sealing her in with him. The car pulled away from the church, leaving the gasping guests and the crumbling ruins of her wedding behind. She pressed herself against the car door, her body trembling with fear and adrenaline. She stared out the window, the city lights a blur. He was silent beside her. He did not speak, he did not look at her. His face was a mask of stone. The car was filled with his silent, terrifying presence. The air felt thick, impossible to breathe. A shiver ran through her, not from the cold, but from the fear. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to make herself smaller. Adrian shifted. Without a word, he took off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The material was rough and heavy. It smelled of him, cigars, something musky, and a clean, sharp scent she couldn't place. It was a rough gesture, not gentle, but it was also strangely tender. A small human gesture in the midst of a terrifying nightmare. She did not thank him. She was too afraid to speak. She just pulled the jacket tighter, the warmth a small comfort against her cold skin. He still did not look at her. The car pulled up to a magnificent brownstone. It was a palace, a monument to old money and dangerous power. She was led inside, up a sweeping staircase, and into a bedroom so opulent it felt like a museum. The furniture was heavy, dark wood. The curtains were a deep velvet. It was a grand room, the kind of room a king might sleep in. But it was not a room for a woman. It was masculine, filled with the deep, musky scent of a man. It was his room. He had brought her to his room. He walked to a corner of the room where several large, elegant boxes were stacked. They were tied with thick ribbons. "These were sent recently," he said, his voice a low rumble. He did not look at her. "I hope they fit." The words were simple, and yet they made her heart plummet. I hope they fit. It was not romantic. It was not a gesture of kindness. It was a statement of control. She realized he had planned for her. He had expected to bring a woman here. He had her new clothes ready for her. He hadn't just stolen her. He had already prepared her place in his world. A small, silent woman appeared in the doorway. She was a maid, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun. Adrian gestured toward the woman. "She will help you. We will eat in a few hours." He did not wait for a response. He turned and left, closing the heavy door behind him. She was alone, with a silent maid, with his room. She stared at the boxes, at the ribbons, and felt a profound sense of confusion. The maid began to light a fire in the hearth. The crackling sound was the only noise in the oppressive silence. Evelyn remained standing in the middle of the room, still in her wedding gown, the delicate lace a cruel joke. The afternoon light began to fade through the tall windows. She watched as the golden light turned to a pale blue, then a deep violet. It was the longest afternoon of her life. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions and fear. What would happen tonight? Would he claim her? Would he be cruel? Why this room? Why had he already planned for her? She walked to the window and looked out. The gates were still standing tall and unmoving. There was no escape. A soft knock came at the door. Evelyn's heart jumped. It was the maid again, her expression still impassive. She motioned for Evelyn to follow. Without a word, the maid led her through the dark, silent hallways. They did not pass a single person. They walked past dozens of closed doors until they reached a smaller dining room. It was not the grand, formal hall she had imagined. This was a private space. Adrian was already there, a glass of dark liquid in his hand, a look of quiet command on his face. The dinner was brief, conducted in almost complete silence. Evelyn could not swallow a bite. The food was impossibly rich, but her stomach was a knot of pure dread. Adrian did not eat. He watched her. His gaze dropped to her untouched plate, his jaw tightening. He set his fork down on the table, the clatter echoing in the silent room. Evelyn flinched. His eyes were cold, sharp, and absolute. "Eat your food," he said, his voice low and hard. "You need your strength." The words were not a request. They were an order. Evelyn's hand trembled as she picked up her fork. She brought a small piece of meat to her mouth. She barely chewed. It felt like paper. The meal was a forced performance, a demonstration of his ownership. When the silent meal was over, the maid led her back to the large empty bedroom. She felt no safer here than at the table. The sky outside the windows turned completely black. The room was dark except for the last embers of the fire. And then the door opened. She stiffened. It was Adrian. He walked in without a word. He did not look at her. He unbuttoned his shirt, leaving it on, and then he lay down on the bed, fully clothed. The bed was enormous, and he lay on the far side, his body a dark, unmoving shadow against the blankets. He did not look at her. He did not touch her. She stared at him, confused. This was not what she had expected. This was not how a man claimed his prize. This was not the brute she had imagined. The silence stretched between them like a thin wire. He was still. He was a statue of a man, watching the shadows on the wall. The tension in the room was thick, suffocating. He was not touching her, but she felt his presence everywhere. Finally, her voice came out, a small, weak whisper in the cavernous room. What kind of man are you?" His body remained still, but in the darkness, his eyes opened. She could feel his gaze on her, sharp and intense. He was watching her. The question hung in the air, unanswered. And in the silence, her fear was replaced by a new, more dangerous feeling, a terrible curiosity about the man who had stolen her life. The silence in the room after Adrian left was heavy, suffocating. Evelyn stood for a long moment, the ache in her arm a constant reminder of his touch. Her mind raced, a tangled mess of anger and confusion. She had been ripped from her life, her wedding destroyed, all for a reason she didn't understand. The house felt like a cage. The man who had taken her was a terrifying puzzle. She was tired of the fear. She was tired of the unanswered questions. She walked to the window, looking out at the manicured gardens below. Everything here was perfect, ordered, controlled, just like Adrian. A shiver ran down her spine, despite herself. She hated that feeling, the way his coldness and his silence seemed to hold a world of secrets. She had to know. She had to understand why her life had been taken. The door opened. Evelyn turned sharply, her heart pounding. Adrian stood in the doorway, as silent and unreadable as he had been by the window earlier. He wore a different suit, dark and impeccably tailored. He looked like a man ready to command his day. "What do you want?" Evelyn asked, her voice sharper than she intended. She would not cower. She would not let him see how afraid she truly was. He stepped into the room, his gaze sweeping over her. "This is my house. You will not question my presence." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "And I am in your house against my will," she retorted, her anger bubbling to the surface. "My wedding was destroyed. My life has been ruined. I demand to know why you did this." "You had no right." Adrian moved further into the room, his eyes never leaving hers. He stood with an air of quiet authority, as if he were used to being obeyed without question. "I have every right. Your father made an agreement." Evelyn stared at him, bewildered. "An agreement? What are you talking about? My father has nothing to do with you." "I have nothing to do with you." He stopped a few feet away, the space between them charged with unspoken tension. His gaze was intense, unwavering. "He came to my father, desperate, begging. He had gambled away everything. He was drowning in debts he could not pay." Evelyn felt a cold shock. A wave of disbelief washed over her. It was a lie. It had to be a lie. Her father, the man who had always taken care of her, the man who had been so careful to keep her life respectable and quiet. "You're lying," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My father would never. He wouldn't." Adrian's expression did not change. He was a stone wall. Your father made his choices. He owed my family more than money. He owed a life. The price was not money. It was his only daughter. The words hit her like a physical blow. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening finality. Her father's distant look at the altar, his strange, tearful goodbye the day before, the clammy grip of his hand. It was all true. He hadn't protected her. He had sold her. Tears welled in her eyes, a mixture of rage and a crushing sense of betrayal. She stared at Adrian, her mind reeling. She had so many questions, so much anger and confusion, but his words had created a new, deeper wound. It wasn't just about being taken. It was about the man who had given her away. The fourth day felt like a lifetime. It had been filled with a silence so thick it was a constant weight on her chest. The afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the room, and the silence was broken by a soft knock. The maid entered, her face impassive. She was carrying a box and a dress bag. The dress was a vision of ivory satin and intricate lace. It was elegant and beautiful, a true bridal gown. But as the maid helped her into it, Evelyn felt no joy. The dress was a costume of her captivity, a beautiful shroud for the life she was about to lose forever. Her hands trembled as the maid fastened the tiny buttons. The lace felt like a net, trapping her. Her reflection was a stranger, a beautiful bride with the eyes of a terrified prisoner. They led her from the room and down the sweeping staircase. The doors to the family hall were open. Inside, it was lit by the soft glow of gas lamps, casting a warm, deceptive light on the scene. It was a wedding. Her wedding. The entire Morello family was there. They stood in small, formal groups, watching her as she entered. The men were dressed in sharp suits, their faces a mix of curiosity and cold suspicion. The women wore elegant gowns, their expressions a study in polite indifference. Evelyn felt 100 pairs of eyes on her. She felt like an exhibit, an object. And then she saw the grandmother. She was seated in a large chair, her back straight as a steel rod. Her face was old, lined with a lifetime of secrets, but her eyes were like two pieces of polished obsidian, sharp, discerning, and unnervingly intelligent. The grandmother's gaze was not one of curiosity. It was one of study. It made Evelyn's skin crawl. Adrian stood at the head of the room with his father, Giovanni. Adrian's face was a mask of perfect indifference. He looked at her, and in that moment, she was nothing more than the object of a deal, a debt being paid. He did not smile, he did not move, until his uncle, a stocky man with a severe face, stepped forward. He was a marriage officer, a man with a heavy book in his hands. He was a man of the law, and in this house, the law was whatever the Morellos said it was. The ceremony was a blur. The uncle read from the book, his voice a drone in the solemn room. Her name. Adrian's name. It all felt like a nightmare. She was a doll in a dream she could not wake from. The uncle looked up, his gaze meeting hers. It was time for her to speak. "Do you, Evelyn Bellin, take Adrian Morello to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The words hung in the air. Her throat was a dry knot. She couldn't speak. She felt the weight of every person in the room on her. The silence was thick, pressing down on her. She was supposed to say no. She was supposed to scream. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. And then she looked at Adrian. His eyes were on her. They were unwavering, not with anger, but with an intensity so profound it was a physical force. It wasn't a look of love. It was a demand, a silent, terrifying command that told her she had no choice. She saw longing in them too, a cold, desperate wanting that unsettled her more than any threat. He was not just taking her. He was taking her for himself. Her breath caught in her throat. Her pulse raced. The silence stretched. The entire room held its breath. She felt the pressure, the fear, and the dark promise in his eyes. I "I do," she whispered. The words felt like a violation. They felt wrong. But they were out now, in the open. The room let out a collective breath. She was his. After the ceremony, Adrian did not touch her. He did not kiss her. He simply turned and escorted her back to her room. He walked a few feet in front of her, his back a solid wall of indifference. He did not say a word. He opened her door, stood aside, and let her enter. She had expected to be claimed. She had expected a show of ownership, but all she got was a silent return to her prison. This was more unsettling than anything else. Before, he never touched me, and now, even as his wife, he still holds back. The contradiction felt deeply, profoundly wrong. She lay awake for hours in her wedding gown, the bed an island of dread. When the moon was high and the house had fallen into a deep, silent slumber, she got up. She needed to breathe. She needed to feel something other than the crushing weight of her new reality. She walked to the door and eased it open. Adrian was there, sitting in a chair in the hallway, reading a book. He was fully clothed, his dark suit a shadow in the dim light. He did not look up. "I need to go out," she said, the words a plea. "Please, I need to see the stars. I need fresh air." He looked up then. His eyes were cold, unreadable. For a long moment she thought he would refuse. Then he stood. "Get changed." He took her to a black car, the same one that had brought her here. He drove in silence, the city lights a blur outside the window. He did not take her to her father. He took her far away, to the docks, to the dark underbelly of the city. He did not speak. He just walked, and she had no choice but to follow. This was her first glimpse into his world. The air smelled of salt and oil and something dangerous. Men in dark suits and fedoras stood in the shadows, smoking cigars. They did not speak to Adrian, but their eyes were a language of respect and fear. They nodded, their deference absolute. It was a world of hushed power, of heavy shadows and quiet deals. And then she saw him, Thomas. He was standing with two other men, a heavy crate at their feet. His clothes were not the elegant suits he wore for her. They were plain, rough, suited for this place. He was not laughing. He was not smiling. He was giving orders. And in the harsh light of a single lamp, she saw a hard, cold look in his eyes that she had never, ever seen before. He was not the gentle man she thought she knew. He was a part of this world. He belonged to it. A wave of nausea washed over her. It couldn't be. The man she loved, the man she thought was safe, was not. He was part of the very nightmare she had been dragged into. She was a pawn, and Thomas, her supposed rescuer, was a player in the same dark game. When Adrian led her back to the car, Evelyn broke down. She couldn't hold it in anymore. The sobs racked her body. She sat in the back of the car, her hands trembling, her face buried in her knees. The man she loved was a lie. Her father was a lie. Adrian hadn't saved her from a monster. He had taken her from one monster and claimed her for himself. Slowly, without a word, he reached a hand out. He did not touch her. He did not comfort her. His hand moved to a small velvet box in the glove compartment and took it out. He set it on her lap without a sound. He didn't look at her, not for a moment. He just kept driving, his face a mask of stone. Evelyn stared down at the box. It was the box that had held her diamond ring from Thomas. She opened it. It was empty. The ring was gone. He had not just taken her. He had taken everything. And he did not need words to tell her so. But as she recoiled from the emptiness, she felt a sudden cold weight on her finger. She looked down at her hand. It was not bare. A ring was there. It was a single, large, flawless diamond set in a simple platinum band. It was impossibly beautiful. It was 1,000 times more expensive than the one Thomas had given her. It was heavy. It felt like a weight of ice. It felt like it was burning. The ring was not a symbol of love. It was a brand. The empty box in one hand was the ghost of a love that was a lie. The heavy, beautiful ring on her finger was the reality of a truth that was a nightmare. Adrian had not just taken a thing from her. He had taken her world and replaced it with his own. She returned to the mansion, a different person. She was no longer just a bride in a forced marriage. She was a woman trapped in a dangerous, violent world with no one left to trust. Her heart pounded with a fear so deep it felt like a sickness. Adrian's restraint felt more dangerous than cruelty, and now even Thomas, her only hope, is tainted. She was truly, completely alone. And with every beat of her heart, she felt the cold fire of his ring. The car door closed with a soft thud, and Evelyn stumbled into her bedroom. The silk of her gown, a bitter mockery of a happy life. She barely made it to the bed before collapsing, the sobs she had held back, now racking her body. They were silent at first, just a shaking of her shoulders, but then they came, great heaving gasps of air. She felt utterly lost. The man she had loved was a lie. Her father was a lie. There was no one left to trust. She didn't have the strength to undress, to move. She just lay there, a crumpled heap of satin and lace on the dark comforter, her body trembling with the sickness of a complete and total betrayal. Her thoughts spiraled, replaying Thomas's face, the hard, cold look in his eyes that she had never, ever seen before. The door opened. She didn't hear a sound, but she felt his presence. It was a tangible thing, a change in the air, a stillness that was not her own. She didn't look up. She couldn't. She just lay there, her sobs now just desperate, shallow gasps for air. Adrian moved into the room. He didn't come to the bed. He just stood there, his presence a heavy weight in the silence. He was a dark, immovable shadow in her periphery. She felt him watching her, not with pity, but with an unnerving intensity. His jaw was tight, a muscle ticking beneath his skin. His hands stayed at his sides, two fists of controlled restraint. He did not comfort her. He did not say a single word. He just stood and watched her fall apart, a silent witness to the devastation he had caused. He didn't leave her either. He stayed. He was an unmoving presence in the room, refusing to give her either comfort or true privacy. He had brought her to this rock bottom, and he was here to watch her hit it. She wanted to scream, to ask him if he had enjoyed this, if this had been part of the plan all along. But she had no voice. Her body was a wreck of trembling limbs and exhausted sobs. The silence between them was thick, charged with unspoken truths and a dangerous, forbidden intimacy he refused to act on. The room felt small, the air suffocating. The terror she felt was mixed with a new kind of awareness. He had brought her to this place, and he was the only person in the world who truly understood the depth of her despair. The morning sun felt like a foreign concept after the last few days spent in the gilded shadows of the mansion. Evelyn felt a desperate need for air, for a single moment of freedom. She walked out into the gardens, a vast, manicured expanse that felt more like a cage than a world. Her legs were shaky, her body weak from days of emotional strain and lack of sleep. She felt the world begin to tilt. She swayed on her feet, the perfectly trimmed hedges blurring before her eyes. Adrian watched from a balcony on the second floor, a dark, motionless silhouette against the stone. His jaw was clenched. He saw the way her body trembled, the sudden, sickly pallor of her skin. He saw the exact moment her knees gave way. His reaction was not a shout. It was a silent, lethal burst of motion. He didn't run. He moved with a horrifying, graceful speed. He passed every servant,
every guard, his presence an absolute command. They all froze, knowing something had shifted. He reached her just as she began to fall, her body limp, her eyes rolling back. He caught her with a quiet authority, as if this was something he had always known would happen. His arms closed around her, a wall of hard, unyielding muscle. He carried her inside, his body a silent force cutting through the house. He didn't speak a single word until he was inside the main hall. He looked at a servant, and his voice was a low, chilling command. "Get the doctor, now!" The servant did not hesitate. The rest of the household watched in silence as he carried her up the sweeping staircase and into the bedroom. He laid her on the bed with a controlled gentleness. He did not touch her beyond that. He stepped back and watched as the family doctor arrived, summoned in less than 10 minutes. The doctor examined her, his movements quick and professional. He gave a quiet diagnosis. "Exhaustion, emotional strain." "She is exhausted, my lord." Adrian simply nodded. His eyes, cold and unreadable, remained fixed on her pale face. He watched as the doctor ordered her to rest and gave a few instructions. He dismissed the doctor with a gesture, and the man left without another word. The room was silent once more. Adrian looked at her for a long moment, his gaze heavy with unspoken thoughts. His eyes refused to soften, but they lingered. He did not say a word, but his presence was a heavy blanket of possession. 2 months had passed. The cold grandeur of the Morello mansion had settled into a kind of grim routine. Evelyn was no longer the trembling victim. She had found a new, simmering defiance. The endless days of confinement had not broken her spirit. They had hardened it. She had learned to navigate the silent labyrinth of the house, to read the unspoken rules of the staff, and to find a fragile sense of self. Adrian's presence was a constant, unyielding weight, a shadow she could never escape. His care was shown in quiet, restrained actions, a bodyguard appearing at the door, a fresh bouquet of flowers in a vase, a silent plate of food arriving on time. He never let it look soft. But the routine did not erase her thoughts. At night she still saw Thomas's face, not as the gentle man she thought she knew, but as the stranger she saw at the docks, his eyes hard and cold. The memory was a poison in her mind, a wound that festered. She was torn between the pain of his betrayal and a confusing awareness of the man who now owned her. Adrian was a monster, but he was a monster with a code, a terrifying, unbreakable sense of control.